On July 29, 2026, global energy markets convulsed. Brent crude futures jumped over 8% in a matter of hours, while analysts at Goldman Sachs projected a 130% surge in Asian spot LNG prices, pushing costs to $25 per million BTUs. The source of this volatility was an explosion at Egypt's Damietta port, a critical node for Mediterranean energy exports. The event centered on a U.S.-owned floating storage and regasification unit, the Energos Winter. Flames from the vessel immediately threatened the gas log Salem, a large LNG carrier moored alongside it for a cargo transfer. Following the blast, Egypt's Ministry of Petroleum reported that emergency protocols were executed instantly, the fire was contained, and the incident resulted in 0 human casualties. While the port safety systems prevented a total loss of the vessels, the breach itself revealed that the eastern Mediterranean's energy infrastructure was physically vulnerable. In the immediate aftermath, local media attempted to stabilize the markets by attributing the fire to a technical failure in one of the ship's engine rooms. That technical narrative collapsed on July 30th. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli announced that security teams had recovered fragments of a weaponized drone from the site of the explosion. Initial suspicion fell on Houthi forces, who issued an immediate denial. Intelligence reports began focusing on Iranian-aligned factions capable of launching long-range suicide drones into the Mediterranean. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi moved the crisis to the diplomatic level, holding urgent calls with European leaders to warn that the regional conflict was now directly threatening global fuel supplies. The recovery of weaponized debris at Damietta confirmed that the port's perimeter had been compromised. For the government, the facility was no longer just a commercial hub, it was a target. The danger of the strike was amplified by the operational state of the vessels. At the moment of impact, the Energos Winter and the gas log Salem were coupled together, actively moving liquefied natural gas through high-pressure hoses. The drone impacted the Energos Winter, igniting an external fire that licked against the steel hulls of both ships. This heat created the conditions for a blevy, a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. A blevy occurs when external fire causes the liquefied gas inside a tank to boil and vaporize. The resulting pressure can cause the containment to fail, triggering a massive, instantaneous detonation. These ships were fully loaded. A detonation involving 2 carriers of this size would release the energy equivalent of a tactical weapon. Had the tanks failed, the resulting blast wave would have destroyed the Damietta port and its surrounding petrochemical infrastructure. The primary defense against this heat was the ship's GTT-96-2 membrane technology. It uses a 0.7 mm layer of Invar, an alloy with almost 0 thermal expansion, supported by reinforced polyurethane foam. This insulation successfully shielded the cargo, keeping the liquefied gas at its required temperature of -162 degrees Celsius, despite the fire raging on the exterior of the hull. While the hull held the heat, an autonomous emergency shutdown protocol, or ESD, monitored the movement of the ships as they drifted in the water. When the drift reached exactly 5 meters, the ESD-1 system killed the transfer pumps and sealed the distribution valves to stop the flow of gas. At 7 meters of drift, the ESD-2 system executed a mechanical dry brake. The hoses detached and sealed themselves automatically, preventing any fuel from spilling into the fire. The facility survived because of these pre-programmed engineering tolerances. While emergency crews cooled the ship's exterior, the critical containment was handled entirely by the vessel's internal hardware.
The intentionality behind the attack is recorded in Iranian state media. 48 hours before the first explosion, a broadcast aired a specific list of regional targets. The broadcast focused on Damietta's 5.2 million-ton capacity, labeling the port a vital gateway for gas exports to Europe. The strike coincided with a wider collapse of regional security. On the same day, U.S. forces targeted militias in Iraq, missiles were intercepted over Jordan, and shipping was disrupted in the Strait of Hormuz. Maritime insurers responded instantly. The international group of P&I clubs withdrew war risk coverage for vessels in the region. This chart shows the immediate financial penalty. With standard insurance voided, operators faced buyback premiums as high as $200 million for a single voyage to keep their ships covered. A drone does not need to sink a ship to disable a trade route. It only needs to make the insurance premiums higher than the value of the cargo. This attack hit Egypt at a moment of extreme domestic energy stress. Declining production in local gas fields has forced the country to begin importing 160 cargoes of LNG to prevent total grid failure. Egypt processes these imports using a fleet of leased FSRUs, massive vessels that regasify liquid fuel to power the nation's electricity plants. The Energos Winter provided 450 million cubic feet of that capacity every day. Its removal from service created an immediate deficit in the national power supply. To compensate, Egypt had to reroute an incoming cargo to the port of Aqaba in Jordan, where the gas was processed and sent back to Egypt through the Arab gas pipeline. The crisis highlights a sharp asymmetry. While Israel can cut pipeline exports during a conflict without losing its own power, Egypt's grid is immediately threatened if its import infrastructure is compromised. The Damietta strike effectively used Egypt's domestic energy needs as a lever to disrupt the broader Mediterranean export market. The event at Damietta presents a conflict of outcomes. The engineering systems performed as designed, yet the region's deterrence failed to prevent the attempt. The survival of the ships was a technical success, but the resulting rerouting of trade and the spike in insurance costs constitutes a strategic setback. The financial pressure extends to the operators. The ship's owner, New Fortress Energy, is already managing hundreds of millions in quarterly losses. The disabling of a long-term asset in Egypt complicates their efforts to stabilize their debt. The July 29 attack altered the risk profile for Mediterranean energy. It demonstrated that massive static assets like the Energos Winter are now frontline targets in a widening proxy conflict. When an asset requires $200 million in emergency insurance just to remain at port, that asset has been functionally neutralized by the threat of violence. Global energy companies are now recalculating their operating expenses. The cost of doing business in the Mediterranean has permanently increased. This shift is forcing a change in vessel design. Maintaining trade in contested waters will likely require the installation of electronic warfare and drone defense systems directly onto civilian commercial ships. For Egypt and Europe, the priority is now diversification. The reliance on centralized, static import hubs like Damietta has proven to be a dangerous bottleneck. The engineering at Damietta is a triumph of industrial safety, yet these internal systems were never designed to deter a military strike. In an era of expanding proxy wars, the resilience of the energy grid depends on more than physical armor. It requires a financial market capable of pricing the risk of a strike before the drone even launches.